No one formula really fits what I want to be as a man.
Yeah, so what do you think it means to be a good man?
What does masculinity mean to you?
It's an evolving answer. I don't think that it is a homogeneous answer by any means. For me, it's constantly evolving. You know, the way I feel about my own masculinity today may very well change tomorrow. Growing up, I would say I was nurtured to feel as if my masculinity was indicative of my success. And specifically that success being in relation to my performance in life. And how is that equating financially? Or bravado, you know, the sense of how I'm exuding myself, welding that energy. And now I would say, you know, today at least my masculinity is defined in how do I understand the privilege and the power of being a male, and how do I use that for justice or for ill? You know, how to use my male privilege to throw my elbows at the table and make space for those that may not have my maleness. But it's evolving. There's a tenderness that I now experience with my masculinity that I didn't experience before. There is a compassion for self that I didn't experience before. That is extremely important for my masculinity. And there are parts I would define as being spiritually uplifting. You know, what does it mean for me to be tender and for me to be compassionate with myself? Well, you know, part of that deals with how do I allow, you know, the spirit of the universe and the energy and the vibration of others to dismantle any feelings of, for lack of words, toxic masculinity that I've been nurtured to have. So it's an evolving answer.
How did you develop your perspective on masculinity?
Oh, wow. How did I develop my perspective on masculinity? That's a great question. My biological father wasn't the most compassionate human, was a hustler. We look alike. Our tonal nature he's no longer alive, but our tonal nature was very similar. He was a scholar. However, he did not exercise his masculinity in positive ways. It was very much, you know, the man of the house does what the man of the house wants to do, and everyone else should listen and follow along. Whereas my dad, my pops that raised me, my stepdad for lack of words, he was very compassionate, very tender, very transparent. So I have these worlds where I try not to allow my nurture, the positive nurture of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a human, you know, humane. I don't want that to be overshadowed by my nature, the part of my biological father that I know is in me. So I have to constantly work the mindfulness of being in community with others that may not have my privilege, my maleness, so I can keep those things in check. But I would say I'm binary, I'm bifurcated in ways. You know, I have this nature versus nurture, and what does that really mean in fullness? So learning what that means, I learned from my biological father just by through the nature of DNA, the body keeps a score. And I learned from my dad that raised me through bearing witness to how he treated my mother, how he treated my sister, how he treated the amazing women of color in the congregations that he served. And I'm learning from my children. I have a 5-month-old daughter, and when I can, every tender moment with her is a reminder of like the significance of, you know, my maleness, my masculinity, and I'm able to be tender with her, gentle with her, compassionate with her. So that is an invitation for me to do the same thing in the world with other individuals.
I'm interested in this tenderness and masculinity. Can you talk about other ways it shows up?
Yeah, the tenderness for me, like, I grew up an athlete. I've always, you know, been involved in some sport, you know, be it football, cross country, baseball. And you're often told, you know, suck it up, deal with it, you know. And for me, the tenderness relates to, like, it's very much manly to be one with my tears. It doesn't devoid me from, you know, my masculinity. If anything, it enhances, in some ways, you know, the very divinity of my masculinity. So for me to be tender, for me to be vulnerable, for me to be transparent. I think one of the gifts of the pandemic is that many of my male friends and I, we were all experiencing the same thing: isolation, you know, worried about our mental health, insecurities, etc., etc. A long list of things that all of us were experiencing. And the pandemic forced us to be a little more tender with each other, transparent, like, ouch, I'm hurting too. You know, how are you processing this? How are you dealing with this? What are you doing for your self-care? What does mental health look like for you? And a lot of it led to, you know, saying to each other for the first time, I love you. We knew it, we displayed it, we showed it, but we never really said it. So for me, being tender is acknowledging the hurt and acknowledging the celebration that can come after that. You know, I say with a lot of things, goodness will prevail. So the tenderness, if I can acknowledge the tender spirit that I'm hurting, that I'm in pain, I'm also acknowledging and celebrating what's going to come after that. Particularly if I can be vulnerable enough, I'm ultimately in community, and these are spaces of healing with other men that are experiencing the same thing. And not that I can experience that with other beings, however they may identify, but here in this case, I'm specifically thinking about men.
How do you think men who haven't necessarily facilitated their own safe spaces with other men, how do you think men can start finding other men in their communities who are willing to be vulnerable with them? Yeah,
so how can other men find safe spaces to be vulnerable, transparent, tender? Oh wow, like this is the this is the great guide. You know, for anyone that's on social media, there's so many outlets and sources right now for individuals that are talking about the trauma that we've experienced. I'm going to be specific here as black men. The trauma we experience being black in this world and the brokenness of this world. And I'm thankful for the online resources that exist. There's so many affinity groups that are out there now for men to really tap into what it means to take care of self and to allow others to bear witness to that so they can understand what it means to take care of self. And I serve a congregation not far from here. And one of the things that we started doing during the pandemic was just checking in with each other. So sometimes it's a matter of just having one accountability partner, and that one multiplies into others, you know, etc. And we all should at least have one person. We can't go through this thing called life alone, and we all need someone. And why not have someone that can identify with the struggle? So I would say, where do we find those groups, and how do we get started? For those that may not be connected, you know, searching online, you know, simple Google search. Your local healthcare providers, nonprofit agencies that are doing affinity group work.
How do you think your personal discoveries about masculinity informs your poetry?
How does my personal discovery about my masculinity inform my poetry? Poetically, that's become my journalistic outlet. I don't want to reside, you know, consider poetry, you know, therapeutic in the sense that I shouldn't go to a therapist or a counselor. But it certainly has a therapeutic quality for me. For me, saying and expressing some of the things poetically that I've been able to share, it's like that ouch effect. Like once I've said it, I've put it out to the universe. I've been remarkably surprised by the number of men that have said, I've experienced that too. Now, I'll give an example. And it's not my fullness to share, so I want to respect and honor my partner's narrative in this. But we've lost 3 babies. And that was a journey. I'm still processing that. I don't know if I will ever get over it, but I constantly work to get through it. And I wrote a series of performances that were exploring, you know, what it means for me as a male when it's not my body to lose a child. And what does it mean to process that? I wrote a series of sermons examining the same thing. And I was remarkably surprised every time I shared a sermon or shared one of those poems from that collection. Not that I felt better when it was out, but I was constantly surprised that there was someone in the community, in the audience, that were in attendance, that would always come up afterwards and say, I've experienced the same thing. If you want to grab coffee, if you want to go for a walk and talk about this, I've yet to unpack this for myself. Maybe we can glean or, you know, exegete this situation together. So my masculinity and the poetics have become a way of being a bridge builder and nurturing community for those with similar experiences.
I think about that sometimes, like how there's not really space for men to process that kind of loss. There's so much around women, which is understandable because, you know, as you express it through the woman's physical process.
Yeah, and I'll respond to that. You know, spaces for men to process loss. We are conditioned and this is not just a male thing, I think this is a Western construct, a problem with the Western construct. We're conditioned to think that grief lasts for a season. I've learned, for me, grief often is a lifetime. I'll just leave that there. Grief isn't just a season, it's often a lifetime. And I don't fully believe in like trauma bonding, but I do believe in the unification of humans through the celebration of coming through trauma. We may not have the same trauma, we don't have the same, local or global or regional experiences or pain, but we all should know what it feels like to center our joy and to celebrate the process of coming through, walking through traumatic experiences.
Yeah, I think that is kind of what's expected with grief, right? It's just like, well, it was such and such time ago. Aren't you done with that?
Yeah. I'm, my biological father and my dad that raised me, they're no longer here. They both transitioned. I'm never going to get over it. It's the nature of life. It happens to us all. But for me to walk through life as if, I'm just okay, that's problematic. The male conditioning would like for me to do that. The human experience is telling me otherwise.
What pressures have you felt as a man? And how have you handled those pressures?
What pressures have I felt as a man? To financially provide. I think I'm a great provider. I want to be clear about that. I am academically, financially blessed, more so than I feel like I deserve, and certainly more so than some of my peers here in Charlotte, individuals here in Charlotte that are struggling. But there is this pressure to provide. There is this pressure to chase the passion versus leaning into curiosity and really exploring the fullness of what this life has for me and for other men. And that is immense pressure that leads to anxiety, stress, depression, high blood pressure, diabetes, etc., strokes, and all those things run in my family. High blood pressure and heart attacks and stroke. I try to be mindful about those things. I don't do a great job at it, but I think one of the problems with the male conditioning is that we create a pace that's unrealistic. We're at this rat race pace, and it's a hamster wheel, and we're checking the box. Like, I got that done, let me check the box and run off to the next thing. We don't take time to really pause and celebrate the accomplishment, or pause and be present. Be still and just be present. And there's a lot of pressure to just keep it moving, keep the wheels moving, keep the progress going forward. And I don't always want to do that. I don't do a great job of doing that. But I know consciously that that's not what I always want to do. So I feel pressure on providing. Yeah, that's the biggest one. Yeah, men being providers. And I do think one of the best ways we can provide, however, is beyond financial support and emotional support, is taking care of ourselves. Ensuring the longevity that I am here, that I'm as stress-free as I could possibly be, that I'm exercising mindfulness, is also ensuring for my children that they will have the presence of their dad in their life. And that is a gift in itself.
What advice would you give a younger version of yourself?
What advice would I give the younger version of myself? Play more. Play and rest more. They're both acts of rebellion. They're acts of resistance. It is adult to play. Stop and celebrate your accomplishments. I'm a kid from the hood that got out. And there are some ways that I still deal with, and I will always process survivor's guilt. And me stopping to celebrate is not just celebrating that I got out, I'm doing relatively well, but it's also celebrating the individuals that supported me along the way and the individuals that are still doing the labor to get out as well. Yeah, and drink more water. Drink more water. Stay as youthful as you can, as long as you can, and not just in our physical appearance, but also in our mental approach to life. Challenge the norm. And I'll close on that one. I'll end on that one. Challenge the norm.
Oh, did you have anything you want to add that we didn't touch upon?
Oh, anything that I would add? I'm constantly curious about how geography contextualizes or recontextualizes masculinity. I've lived a lot of different places. My dad that raised me was in the military, so I was able to really see a spectrum of personalities from, the traditional or the prototype of a military soldier, my dad's compassion in the home, to men that worked in theater and art galleries, and the stereotypes that may exist there. So I saw this amazing, diverse spectrum of masculinity. And at this point as an adult, I'm thankful for that geographic spectrum and that, complexity and diverse beauty. And as an adult, I get to pick and choose what I want out of those different spaces. Like, no one formula really fits what I want to be as a man. And that's okay. And because the male experience is not a monolithic experience. It's so vastly different for all of us. Certainly there are men of color that I'm having a very similar life existence with, for good or for bad. And yet we can't fit into a box. That in itself is a celebration, for those that have really brought into the notion of toxic masculinity. I think any identity can be toxic. So I hope we can reimagine a better lens of what masculinity can be. I think we had a great time in history really to reimagine masculinity in all its forms.
Do you want to walk down there then? Another question I had as kind of follow-up to the play question.
To the what question?
The play question. So I was reading an article maybe a month ago, and it was this man who was saying he just wanted to go outside and play with his friends. He wanted to go play tag. And I think a lot of the time when we think about like sports with men, that's like the way men usually engage with play. What are other venues for play?
I'll give you one that I love. Okay. I'm a major comic book nerd. And one of my favorite ways of bonding with other men in the comic nerd community is jumping on Zoom and like we do a ranking of something. Rank your top 5, MCU films, your top 5 superhero-based films, rank your, top 5 villains. And there's something about that back and forth dialogue. It does lead to like some sensitive conversations. It leads to a delightful play. It leads to the same thing we did as kids, when we were deciding, I'm this character, you're that character. There's a play that still takes place in that. I enjoy that. So the nature of play, one of the areas that I consider play, and maybe other creators in this area don't, but I do. There's something beautiful about calling other poets that may identify as male, regardless of how they're, whatever gender assignment at birth, that are poets across the nation. I'm having these delightful and playful conversations with them. Stepping away from the traditional conversation about form and structure and certain thematic things, and really asking, what's feeding your spirit right now that you're reading, that you're listening to, that you're watching? And there's a form of play that takes place there because we're also critiquing each other's taste in those things. Poets that I'm really digging right now that challenge my understanding of masculinity growing up and affirm my understanding that I'm evolving and growing to. Jericho Brown, absolutely love the work and the human. Paul Tran, really thankful and blessed to have that human in my life and to share space. Jennifer Falu, like the love and accountability from her is like really phenomenal. Amy Bagwell and Brent Bagwell, the work they do in their embodiment and representation as a couple, as two creatives. So I think whatever field individuals are in, I hope that they could find like their metric for really challenging whatever norms that they've been able to, that they've brought into, that they reside with. Because within all those things, there's an element and an opportunity to play. Like I feel very comfortable with all those individuals and transparent, where I would like call them and like have the most absurd conversation, to the most significant and radical and pertinent conversation that needs to be had. These are individuals that affirm me, challenge me, hold me accountable, and give me the invitation to do the same with them. And that is, I go back to saying spiritual uplifting for my understanding of my masculinity. I will add another thing to it. This comes to mind. When I think about like safe spaces for me understanding my masculinity, and I'm going to say best practices for approaching dismantling anything that I have within me that I know is not healthy for myself or my family. I think of this organization called Messy Roots. Messy Roots is an organization here in Charlotte. It's run by this phenomenal educator named Mario. And one of the things Mario did for me during the pandemic, I need to call him and share this with him, and that'll be a part of the tenderness and the transparency. But he sent me what is called, I think it's called a spider plant, a spider lily or something like that. He sent me this plant during the pandemic. And it was late into the pandemic that I had a cousin that was killed by an off-duty police officer. And Mario sent me this plant. He didn't know that, I'm pretty sure he didn't know at the time what I was processing or dealing with. And there was something special about nurturing that plant and keeping it alive. For a black man, for a man, period, to be working to cultivate, to keep this plant alive. So in some ways, it has led to this path of let me do these things that may be, and men have been taking care of plants for decades. But I wasn't a man that was taking care of plants. It was not, I don't know if I've ever saw my father really like cultivate any flowers or anything, but I definitely saw my mother do it. So maybe from just witnessing that, I created this stereotype around it, and it's this bias that I had and didn't even realize I had. But now I can imagine not doing that. And there's a gentle nature about doing that. And I see other things like that in my life. I enjoy yoga. I enjoy quiet walks in the park alone or being out in nature. And not that these aren't innately masculine things, but I think my identity as a kid, that I prescribe these things to, they're not for me and my masculinity or my brand of masculinity. And at this point, I can imagine not having those things being a part of my brand of my masculinity. So Messy Roots is an organization that's been a great outlet for me. I would say the same thing about my male siblings at Goodyear Arts. To be able to create in a space with others, and going back to that word tender, getting a critique can be a tender moment. So there's this nature and this language that we've nurtured with each other. How can I say something hard, knowing it is coming from a place of love, a place of compassion, a place of genuine concern, a place of wanting to see me and others do well creatively. So I'm thankful for that space too, as being an outlet for me having a more broad understanding of my own masculinity.
I love that so much. Thank you. That was a great PS to add.
Yeah, so what do you think it means to be a good man?
I don't think there's a single definition.
Things that make up a good man are just the things that make up a good person. Someone who's honest, someone who's decent.
You're also willing to express yourself in a healthy way. and you're in touch with your emotions as well.